Welcome to Friends and Fiction. 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories. Novelists Mary Kay Andrews, Kristin Harmel, Kristy Woodson Harvey, and Patti Callahan Henry are 4 longtime friends with more than 70 published books between them. Together, they host Friends and Fiction, with author interviews and fascinating insider talk about publishing and writing, to highlight and support independent bookstores. They discuss the books they've written, the books they're reading now, and the art of storytelling. If you love books and you're curious about the writing world, you're in the right place.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Friends and Fiction Show. I'm Mary Kay Andrews.
I'm Kristin Harmel.
And this is Friends and Fiction, 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories to support indie bookstores, authors, readers like you, and of course, our librarians.
Now, if you're not with us already, we do hope you'll join our Facebook group, which is more than 300,000 members strong. We would also like to invite you to follow us on Instagram and YouTube and to subscribe to our Substack newsletter, which is full of awesome bonus content. You can find out more about our community and all we have to offer at friendsandfiction.com.
On this episode, we are so excited to welcome Lee and Andrew Child to discuss their new novel, Exit Strategy, which was just released on November 11th. Ta-da! Okay, let's tell you a little bit about Lee and Andrew before we bring them on. Lee Child is the author of more than 24 New York Times bestselling Jack Reacher thrillers, with most having reached the #1 position. Foreign rights in the Reacher series have sold in 100 territories. Incredible. And the series has also been developed into a hit show on Amazon Prime.
A native of England and a former television director, Lee now lives in England and Wyoming. Andrew Child is the author of 9 thrillers written under the name Andrew Grant, and he's also the younger brother of Lee. Also a native of England, he now lives on a wildlife preserve in Wyoming with his wife, the novelist Tasha Alexander. Together, Lee and Andrew have co-authored a page-turning new Jack Reacher thriller, Exit Strategy, which was just released on November 11th.
Alan, would you please bring Lee and Andrew on? Hi, guys.
Hello. Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us on the show. It's a delight to be here.
Well, it's a delight having you. Guys, Lee and Andrew, welcome to Friends and Fiction. Okay, Andrew, we think your millions of diehard Reacher fans want to know exactly what kind of mayhem our hero is facing in Exit Strategy. Can you tell us what the book is about? And then our favorite question, what's it really about?
Well, you put your finger on the pulse right away there. Reacher does get involved in a fair amount of mayhem in this book. It all starts out pretty innocuously, though. He's in Baltimore because he wants to catch a favorite band who's playing that night. So he stops for a coffee on his way to the venue, and while he's there, somebody slips a note into his pocket asking for help. It's clearly a case of mistaken identity. The guy meant the note for somebody else, but Reacher wound up with it. So once he realized someone was in trouble, he was intrigued, and his sense of duty made him feel like he needed to find out more about it, and that was kind of the start of the slippery slope. It was there. He got sucked in, and that turned out to be a very bad thing for the bad guys in the book.
That's so true. What would you say the book is really about at its core?
I think it's really about on this one thing that we're really happy with this book is the villain, the guy who is behind the whole thing. And so I suppose in his case, he's not somebody who is kind of physically intimidating or kind of physically grotesque or anything, but we think that the scheme that he's up to, what he's prepared to do to make money, how he's prepared to exploit other people is particularly grotesque. And so I guess what it's really about is how far would you go? How much harm would you do to other people in order to enrich yourself?
Ooh, that's fascinating. Okay, great. So, I think when we have writing pairs on, our viewers are always really interested in hearing sort of the nuts and bolts of how it works. So, I'm going to ask you each a question about that. But so, Lee, let's start with you. How exactly does the division of labor shake out when the two of you are working on a new book together?
Well, I'm legendarily lazy. So if there's any opportunity of making sure Andrew does all the work, then that's what I'm going to do. And that's basically the situation with exit strategy. I love the opening because it is the perpetual problem with a Reacher story, because Reacher, it has no official position. He is no longer employed by the U.S. military. He is not a private eye. He's not a cop. He's just a lone man. And yet, in some way, he's got to get involved with an adventure every year. And so a lot of the time that depends on pure coincidence or wrong place, wrong time. We try and shake it up and have new ways. And this one is a great opening because this is a direct plea for help. And I wish I'd thought of it earlier, actually, because it reminds me of what my father-in-law used to do. Every single time we got Chinese food, we would all get to our fortune cookies and we'd read them out. And he would always say, "Help, I'm a prisoner in a fortune cookie factory." And that is fundamentally the way that it opens. And the villain in this one. We have a perpetual problem, I think, as both as readers and writers, with the villains, because what can you do year after year after year? We're both very afraid, really, of what we call villain inflation, where suppose you write a book where the plot is about a terrorist going to explode a nuclear bomb in the center of New York. And, we overcome that problem. What do you do next year? Is it going to be 2 bombs in Chicago? What do you do the next year after that? Is it going to be 4 bombs in Los Angeles? So we always try to find a human scale of situation where it's and how do we pick the scam and the villain? And that is intensely personal. And this is where Andrew and I are very similar, that there are certain people, certain things in the world that just boil our blood. And so it can be, some low-level thing, but we just get furious about it. So we try and pick something on that human level that will engage us. And therefore, if we are furious about it, so will the reader be, without it being baroque and exaggerated and so on. And so this book is Andrew's book. He schemed the whole thing, plotted it, invented it, and that is how I want it to be. I started with Reacher. Now he's continuing with Reacher. And I read it as a fan, just as a reader, just anxious to see what is Reacher doing now, just like I hope millions of people around the world are going to do.
Well, it's such a good propulsive book. I mean, we both really enjoyed it. Andrew, I'm curious, after hearing Lee talk about kind of how the book came together, when you're giving it to him as a reader after you've done a first draft, are there particular strengths of his you rely on in sort of the first round of editing the book, or the first round of bringing it even more alive? Are there things that he helps bring out the best in you?
Well, really, my goal, whenever you're writing, you got to put the readers first and foremost. Everything that you do, you're doing because you hope that they're going to enjoy it. And so, if Lee is this, essentially an early reader, my main goal is or my main hope is just that when he reads it, he's going to enjoy it. And if he does, then that really tells me I'm on the right track, rather than coming to me with a whole long list of, oh, this bit was no good and that bit didn't work. The goal is that he reads it and says, wow, yeah, I really enjoyed that. I couldn't put it down. So that's what I'm going for.
Awesome.
Lee, I'm wondering about Reacher's creation story. I read that you were dead broke. Is that right? When you started writing the first book, motivated by the twin muses of fear and hunger?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I had a job that in television that I really, really liked. It was a very arcane, specific job to the British commercial network system. And it was incredibly interesting, fulfilling, very stressful at times, very important at times. We covered the week between 5 of us, being in control of the transmission leaving the broadcast station. It felt very high stakes. It was terrific. I loved it. And in a lot of ways, I wish I could have carried on doing it. But one day, my boss said something to me that made it just impossible for me to continue. He said, "You're fired."
That'll do it.
That'll do it. And, not just me, and not because of, any felony or misdemeanor on my part. It was just that 1990s restructuring thing where they suddenly got the idea that, let's fire all these old guys and hire cheap young kids and make even more profit. It happened all around the world. And it happened in every industry. And in my particular station, probably 300 people were let go. And so I was an old, expensive guy. I was actually 39. That was considered very old in the world of TV. And, I had a great wage, and I had benefits. I had a pension and all that kind of thing. And that was old-fashioned and had to be gotten rid of. And so I was out of work with a set of hyper-specific skills that I was really good at, but they were dedicated to the job I had just lost, and they were no good anywhere else. So I really didn't know what to do. And it was a bit of a panic. I was like everybody else. I had a family, I had a mortgage, I had a car loan, I had a credit card, all that kind of stuff. And I couldn't think of what to do. But then I sort of calmed down a bit and said, all right, take 2 steps back. Look at the helicopter view. What was it that I used to do? And what I used to do was understand what the audience wanted, what they would respond to, what they would like and not like. And parallel with all of that, I was a huge reader, always had been. I taught myself to read at the age of 3, and I read just obsessively ever since then. Literally a book a day, most years I would read. But strangely, ridiculously looking back on it, I had never really considered where do they come from. I just thought they were there. I'm glad, Mary Kay, that you mentioned librarians at the beginning, because librarians were huge for me. The idea that you could go to a place and they would give you a book, any book you wanted, or sometimes 2 or sometimes 6. And but I just thought they were there on the shelf. And I was literally 35 years old before I understood how people were doing this. There was one series of books that I'm sure you know, the Travis McGee books by John D. McDonald.
Oh, God, yes. Definitely a big John D. fan.
Right. And I discovered those and loved them as stories. That's one of the great series of all time. But at the same time, I suddenly could see what he was doing and when and how and why. And so it popped in my head almost like a blueprint. So in the back of my mind, I thought, you know what, I would like to try that. And then when I did eventually lose my job, and I thought, okay, you've got a sense of the audience. What other medium could you use that sense in? I suddenly thought, I'll write a book. I've read plenty. How hard can it be? So it's all down to John D. McDonald, really. And I just set off and did it on a wing and a prayer. And so that's where Reacher came from. As you say, absolute necessity, desperation, fear, hunger. And when they kick me out, they give you a bit of severance money. And I had about 7 months, 7 mortgage payments in the bank. So it had to be done before that ran out.
Wow. Well, tell me how a Brit creates such an iconic American character like Reacher, who is a retired U.S. Army major. Was there anybody in your family who had a background in the military?
Yeah, my dad had been in World War II and my granddad in World War I. And my dad didn't talk much about the war, which was typical of that generation. But I he talked around the edges of it, and one of the things that he made very clear was how fascinated he was with the difference between the rules inside the military and the rules inside the civilian world. They were not the same thing at all. And my dad was a very conventional man who would never willingly break a rule, certainly never willingly break a law. But the lawlessness of military operations was astonishing to him. And then returning to the civilian world afterward, it was like this period that had happened that he could never go back to, but he regarded as almost a different planet. And so I picked up on that general feel. Plus, a lot of it's just from reading. You know, the U.S. military does not take great pains to keep itself secret. It's all over the world. The stories about it everywhere. You meet people all the time. And I felt, having read a lot of history and so on, armies are not that different one place to the other, going right back to the Romans, probably. The experience of the individual soldier is always the same. So I thought, I know enough to get away with it, probably. And the idea that he's an American hero, well, the stories are set in America, absolutely. But that particular character, the noble loner, the mysterious stranger, very much features in American Westerns, of course, but prior to that had been huge in medieval Europe, the knight errant. It had been a feature of Scandinavian sagas, Anglo-Saxon battle poems. You could say it goes all the way back to Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad and so on. This character has been around forever. So it was really just writing about that perpetual human character in a specific setting. And I knew the US pretty well by then. I started writing in 1995, and I'd been back and forth to the US for 21 years at that point, because my wife is American. And so I felt I knew the country well enough. And in fact, I felt I knew the country in a useful way. As an outsider looking in, you see stuff that is not necessarily visible to Americans because they've lived with it all their life. They're totally used to it. They no longer notice it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Okay, guys, I have to ask you about the coffee consumption, because I know Reacher is drinking like an incredible number of cups of coffee every day. And I think I've read that do you both drink a ton of coffee? Tell us about the coffee. Andrew, do you want to tell us about the coffee?
Yeah, I mean, coffee is something that just became part of our lives. It's really quite ridiculous. I mean, for me, I started drinking coffee certainly before I think I was probably about 4 years old when I started drinking.
Stop. Are you serious?
Yeah. In those days, I had milk in it. That was the only difference.
Oh my goodness.
But and then I always loved it. I drank it at every opportunity, and then as you go through life, your teenage years when you're up too late and need something to get yourself going in the morning, coffee does the job. Same when you've got I had a job for a long time where I would be going around visiting clients. So everywhere you went, somebody gave you a cup of coffee. It was fabulous. Then it was always. I noticed the first time I noticed a problem with coffee actually was around that time in my life, because it would get to the weekend and I would be up I'd stay in bed later. So by the time I got up, if I got up at about 10 o'clock, I was already several cups of coffee behind. And so I would have a headache, and it would take me the rest of the weekend, kind of chasing enough cups of
wow.
be able to get rid of it. And then once I started writing, and often I'm a night person. I work best when the sun's gone down, and so there's just something so lovely about sitting. Your whole world really is just the size of the pool of light that your laptop casts. There's just you, that pool of light, and the story that you're writing, and a lovely mug of coffee. And so when you get into the particularly in that final stage of finishing a book, when you have complete tunnel vision, the only thing you're focused on, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're just finishing the book. So at one point I think it was up to sort of the high 20s, possibly 30 cups a day. It was completely out of hand. And I some people will talk about how they've had too much coffee and they can't sleep. I was the other way around. I couldn't sleep if I hadn't had enough coffee. There was one time when Tasha and I had been invited to do some classes at the University of Wyoming, which is kind of near where we live. And it would have been a whole weekend thing that we were doing. And we finished the last session on the Sunday, and we drove home about 45 minutes from the town. And it was late. We wanted to go to bed. And Tasha looked at me and she said, I was kind of grey. I was sweaty. She said, "You need coffee, don't you?" Because I just couldn't get off to sleep. So she went and she made me a double espresso, which I drank. Then she made me another one, which I drank. And then I was like, oh, yeah, now I can go to sleep. So
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that would keep me up for the next 12 hours.
He's terrible.
Wow.
He's terrible. I mean, I'm bad enough. My mother-in-law was a nurse, and they get all the sort of medical news and advice. And at one point, this must have been 30 or 40 years ago, there was a phase where allegedly coffee was bad for you. And she said she knew I drank a lot of coffee. She said, "How much do you drink?" And I hadn't quantified it at that point, so I said, "I'll count tomorrow." And it was 36 mugs of coffee I had in a day. And I thought that was bad. But as Andrew said, a lot of people take a glass of water to bed with them. Andrew takes a cup of black coffee to bed. And we can't do without it. It's our version of heroin.
I love it. Well, and I love that you've given that to Reacher too. That's so cool. Okay, so Andrew, in Exit Strategy, Reacher shows up in Baltimore, as you mentioned, to attend a musical concert. So inquiring minds might ask what kind of music Reacher likes.
Well, Reacher, he likes a lot of different kinds of music, but generally he focuses on kind of old school blues music. And anything with a kind of bluesy edge to it, and it's a theme through a lot of the books. I mean, right back to Killing Floor, there's a lot of music references, and I think in the early books there was a lot of Howlin' Wolf was in there, similar artists, and we've tried to keep that going. And in some of the recent books we've brought in some new artists, but same kind of school of music.
Does that come from your own musical interests as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Killing Floor is the title of a blues song. And later in the series, Bad Luck and Trouble, that's a line from the song Born Under a Bad Sign. And to refine it more, I think, that sort of 1930s, 40s electric blues, the Chicago blues, which was about blues artists from the Deep South traveling north to Chicago to look for work, to escape discrimination and so on. And so it's heavily tied to the idea of being on the road. And a lot of those songs are on the road songs. And a lot of them musically, don't want to be a musical nerd here, but there's always a tempo to a song. And a lot of those great songs come in at about 88 beats per minute, which is about walking pace for Reacher. And so in a lot of the books, he's hearing music in his head as he walks because his pace is exactly the tempo of the song. And so it was very much about not only the music, but the motion, being in motion, which is the key to Reacher. He can never stay in one place for very long. He has to move on. And he has this soundtrack in his head that propels him.
And if there are times when he's forced to be in one place, like every now and again when he gets thrown in jail or anything like that, that's always the way that when he has that enforced stillness, that is how he overcomes it, is by playing music in his head as well.
Oh, I love that. I love the specificity of that. That's really cool. Okay, so you guys talked a little bit about the villains and how you can't always create these big over-the-top plots, right? Because what are you going to do next? So you kind of dig into the human aspect of the villains. Can you talk a little bit about, without giving too much away, just the general inspiration for this storyline? It was, I thought it was clever and interesting, including the way he's drawn into it, but the way that it plays out throughout the book. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what inspired this particular book, Andrew?
Well, that's a really good question, and I don't know how much we can answer that, because a lot of this is kind of subconscious and instinctive. Whenever we talk about, people often ask about research, what research do you do to inform this story? And we do know, apart from, there's the kind of detail research that you can do. If you're mentioning a particular kind of gun, how many bullets does it hold? If you're talking about a car, how fast does it go? Those kind of things you can find out. But the more profound research, the kind of research that you do, which is what forms the foundation for the story, for us, that has to be something that you have come across probably almost at random. It's just something that you've read about, that you've seen, that you've thought about, and has been bubbling away at the back of your mind for a long period of time. And so with this book, the way it started, the opening scene that we described, that was something that I was just thinking, okay, how do we get Reacher into the story? And that was the way that I wanted to do it. And then the question, of course, is, well, what is the story? And so it really the two things came together. One of them was, aside from the city of Baltimore, there's one very specific location, which is quite an unusual location, that came in. And that was something I read about years and years ago. There is a place almost exactly like what we describe. The only thing is that it's actually in Kansas. But we, it wasn't convenient for the story for it to be there, so we moved it to be near Baltimore. But the place itself essentially does exist, and I was fascinated by it when I read about it. And then on top of that, what the villain is up to, that came again from just a lot of stuff I'd read about. As we were saying, we're always fascinated in military stuff, and
Right.
read a lot about that. And some of the stuff, of course, is historical, and some of it is looking ahead to what the future of warfare might be like. And, we're seeing this really developing now, with Ukraine. Ukraine is like a sort of morbid laboratory, isn't it? Because, all of the new developments with drone warfare and so on are coming out from there. So a while ago, I was reading people's ideas about where warfare would go, how it would be organized, how it would be managed. And my imagination kind of got hold of that. I wasn't a very good corporate citizen back in the day. I'm always very cynical and distrusting of any kind of corporate motive, any profit motive. And so, I started thinking about where people could go. What could they do with if warfare was privatized? And I don't know if you saw, but sometimes something that's very gratifying, I find, is when you come up with something completely fictitious, and then later on it turns out that there's something, it's either true or something very similar. And so I was reading the other day, I don't know if you saw this report about the drone operators in Ukraine. They essentially, the system they're using, the interface is like a video game. And the controllers that are running these drones, causing explosions, killing people, they essentially get points. And the more points they get, the better equipment they're then entitled to. This is how the equipment gets allocated. And so, that's not the same as what we were speculating about in exit strategy, but it's kind of the same ballpark. And so, obviously with a book, it takes a year or so to write. And it fascinated me that something a ball that we set rolling a year ago suddenly has this resonance right around the time it's coming out. Same kind of thing happened when we did The Sentinel. Do you remember that one? That was all about cybercrime, and right when cities being held to ransom when sort of electronic pirates lock down their computer systems and demand a ransom to reopen. And right around the time that launched, again there were reports of 2 or 3 massive cyber attacks in the United States. So I just love it when there's that the fictional world and the real world come together.
Well, it's fascinating, but I feel like it's a little bit terrifying too, in a way, because you're imagining the worst, right? And then it comes to pass. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if there's a rogue mercenary organization attacking Armenia, we know where to look. Look for you two. Tell us both. I think I love to write villains, and obviously you guys too. Would each of you tell us about a favorite villain that you've created in all your books? How about Lee? You go first.
Yeah, I mean, in a funny way, my probable favorite is from a book called Night School, which is where there's a guy who is inside the US military based in Germany. Night School is a prequel, so it's set during the 1990s, and there's still a big US presence in Germany. And a lot of Cold War equipment still hanging around there and in warehouses, and some of it's missing. And the guy that has made it missing was the villain. But I wanted to make him not like a James Bond villain. You know, he's not going to be sitting there stroking a white cat. I wanted to make him somehow pathetic, sort of hapless guy with ambitions. Actually, what he wants to do is own a big ranch. That's all he wants to do. And he's from Sugar Land, Texas, and he wants to own a big ranch in Texas, and he has no money. And so he's stolen some equipment and he's going to sell it to terrorists to buy a ranch. And I thought, you know, that sort of limited human ambition and his rather bumbling and ridiculous manner, he's a sad guy. And he was my favorite villain because he wasn't, you know, like a Bond villain. He wasn't some big, huge, it's not Die Hard, you know, the guy on the top floor, the really big bad guy. He was rather incapable. It was just that what he'd stolen was so immensely valuable to terrorists worldwide that he had to be found and stopped. But he himself was a very human and very sad guy. And that's how one of the things I love when I'm hanging out with Andrew, Andrew's a really nice guy, don't get me wrong, but it's possible that people will annoy him. And, you know, he'll get a call or a letter. That's even better. He opens a letter and it's some ridiculous thing, you know, some inefficiency from the bureaucracy or something like that. And I see him pick up his phone and I just sit back. I wish I had a bag of popcorn at that point because I know it's going to be hilarious. And so that is the kind of response, because we feel readers have that response. You know, readers get exasperated and frustrated with certain things. Readers don't confront cat stroking Bond villains every day, but they do confront these annoying bureaucrats and so on. So just ratchet that up a couple of steps. That's the sort of villain that we really want to create. And I think it keeps it, because Exit Strategy is the 30th Reacher book. And if we had allowed this endless inflation of villains after 30 books, we'd be in a ridiculous situation. So we try and keep it earthbound, keep it human.
Yeah, Andrew, do you have a favorite villain that you created?
Well, what I would do, I would want to sort of cheat very slightly with the answer and say collectively the villains for the series of books I did set in Birmingham, Alabama, with the detective Cooper Devereaux, because when I was starting that series, I'd become fascinated by the FBI profiling team and the work that they did. And the thing is that, you know, I think it's no good making a profile of the hero, because I mean, after Silence of the Lambs and so on, you know, why would you try to do that? It's already been done brilliantly. But I was still fascinated by the concepts and by the material. So what I decided to do was to use all of that psychological stuff to inform the villain rather than the hero, because it became fascinating to me. If you look at what some of these people do, just the, you know, sickening, hideous crimes that they commit, and you start to think about, well, why does somebody do that? You know, it's not that they wake up in the morning and give a maniacal laugh and decide that they're going to do something evil. You know, it's not, that doesn't work that way. You know, because of the way their brains are wired, what they do, even though it's incomprehensible to us, what they do is the only thing that makes sense to them. It is just the natural, logical conclusion. So how is it that you can start with that kind of conclusion and walk it back to a point where where we can actually understand what's going on. And when you do, what I found was that even though a lot of these crimes were just appallingly hideous, the motivation, the thing that made somebody commit these crimes was actually really sad. Their life was terrible. So appalling things had happened to them. Things weren't right in their head. And they were doing things for once you really strip it all the way back, maybe you obviously you'd never excuse the actions, but maybe you can start to understand the motivation behind them. So I did 3 of those books, and the things the villains were doing, I think, were I was really proud of those villains in a way, because they were doing these crazy, appalling things, but hopefully I was shedding a light on them that made it more understandable and more human. The why they were doing it rather than just what they were doing.
Yeah. I have a question, but we have to ask you about the television series. So many people have been introduced to Reacher through the television series. And this is not the first iteration, right? You had the Tom Cruise era.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's been 2 steps: Tom Cruise and Alan Ritchson, but the biggest step really behind that is the feature film to streaming television, those 2 iterations spanned the invention of streaming television.
Yeah.
The Tom Cruise feature film deal was done in 2005. When,
wow.
Even though the first movie didn't come out till 2012, 6 years of development, a year of shooting and post-production, that's fairly typical for Hollywood. So in a way, by the time 2012 rolled around, the first movie was released, the concept was already a little bit out of date. Because here's the truth, that if streaming television had been around forever, no author would ever choose a feature film, because the streaming season, the running time is such a luxury. It is 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours to tell the story. It means you can tell the whole story. You can get the quiet parts. You can get the funny parts. You can get the sweet parts. It doesn't have to be relentless action to cram it all in.
Wow.
So streaming is a default choice. Nobody would choose anything other but it hadn't been invented yet. So the 2 things spanned the invention of it. And also, an inside baseball type of thing is that with a feature film, it is the star who has to attract the investment. In other words, will the actor carry the weight of $100 million worth of investment? Whereas streaming television, the platform pays for it, and you have virtually free choice of an actor. And so that was a really happy transition as well, because, Tom Cruise is absolutely a lovely guy, a terrific man, a good friend, and a smart guy, very, very perceptive about storytelling, genuinely. But he's 5'8", with his shoes on. And so that is not Reacher. And the readers, of course, totally rebelled about it. So when we switched to television, we thought we're going to correct that, and which was not easy, because actors are generally small. They really are. That is universally true. So to find a big guy who can also act well is not easy, but we did. We found the right guy, and Alan Ritchson is a terrific person as well in private life. He's good fun to work with. He's good fun to hang out with. But he captures something that I was desperate to get, which is just the presence. For the auditions, I made my mind up that I would judge it on the first second that he stepped on the screen, because that was really all that mattered to me. It was the dialogue can be coached, everything else can be directed, but you cannot fake that implacable presence. So I needed a guy who would step on the screen, and before he did anything or said anything, he must own that screen in a way that was unmistakable. And Alan was the guy that was able to do that. And subsequently, he's proved to be fantastic. He's a great actor. He's a diligent guy, works incredibly hard. I mean, physically, he is a huge guy, but before each reaches season, he works out for a month to get even huger. And he reads the books obsessively. He mines them for all the tiny little things. And I really feel that when I'm watching him on screen, that is Reacher. It totally is.
Yeah, I think he really captures the quiet intensity.
Exactly. And that kind of feeling that he knows already what's going to happen 3 seconds from now, and he's kind of patiently waiting for everybody else to catch up. I think he really nails it.
Well, and how wonderful that he's taken the initiative to dive deep into the books, because I don't think all actors would do that. You know what I mean? I feel like some actors would say, I'm going to put my own spin on this, or I understand it to a point, but I'm going to bring myself to it. Whereas I think he really disappears into the character.
He sure does. And in fact, for season 4, which is all shot and all ready to go, we don't have an air date for it yet, but it's all ready. We encourage him to do more to figure out the fights for himself, because we stage these fights and he's got to actually do it, which is arduous physically, because you know how it works. There's numerous takes and numerous angles and all of that. It is physically very difficult. And so we thought it was only fair to say, all right, you figure it out. You choreograph the fights. You especially do the emotional temperature of the fights, because that's something very important to Reacher. These are not just regular cinema fights. Reacher is going to sort you out. And we wanted Alan to invent that as well as do that. And so season 4 is spectacular from that point of view.
Can't wait.
And wonderful to have a partner like him in this whole endeavor. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just briefly, so Andrew, I was thinking when you were talking about this, about the interest you had in FBI profiling, how much easier it would be if Reacher were an FBI profiler or a detective or something that brought cases before him. But he's, as we kind of were talking about earlier, he's the wandering hero. So he's a guy whose family background is only slowly revealed over the course of the book. He travels by bus. He has no cell phone, or I should say the books. He has no cell phone. He has no personal belongings. Lee, can you talk a little bit about the inspiration for that? Why is he a guy with no attachments, and why is that a challenge you like to take on?
It was, and this is something that readers don't necessarily want to hear, but writing is, of course, an art, and it's creative, and it's a noble tradition, and it's all of that good stuff. But for me in particular at that time, it was not going to be a hobby. It was not going to be a sort of side hustle. It had to pay the bills. So it was a job, and it had to work. So I was it was like going down a funnel where there were so many other great writers doing different types of things that I thought, what's the point of going head to head with somebody doing something so well already? I need to find a different path. And I was a fan of numerous mystery, crime, and thriller series. But a lot of them, in fact, pretty much all of them, were fundamentally soap operas, in the sense that you had a hero who, let's say he was a cop, he would have superiors, he would have underlings, he would have colleagues, he would have peers, he would have a home, he would have a family. He was probably divorced, his teenage daughter probably hated him or whatever, but there was a family feeling around him. There was a neighborhood feeling. He probably had a favorite bar. He probably had a restaurant where he was a regular, all of those soap opera type of things. And I don't say that in any way negative. I mean, I was in TV. I know that soap opera is an incredibly powerful narrative engine. It absolutely is. It's an art of its own. And the soap opera audience is actually a very sophisticated audience, because they can remember things for months before they're picked up again. So it wasn't that I was denigrating soap opera. I just thought everybody else does it, so I need to do something different. And a lot of decisions were based on that. Even his name, his first name is Jack, because at the time that I was starting to think about it, I was reading new people, finding new books, and I saw there was one series that had just started out that I knew instinctively was going to be huge. and that was Michael Connelly's series about Harry Bosch,
Yeah.
whose first name is actually Hieronymus. So again, don't do what other people do. He had a fancy, cutesy name. I thought, I'm going to have the most simple name. Everybody else that was doing ex-military was doing, ex-Delta Force or Navy SEAL or something. I thought, don't do that. Let's do a military cop. And so a lot of it was funneling away from what other people were doing in order to stake out my own territory. So that, that's where a lot of the origin came from, that it was finding my own space. And I think all authors, the best authors do that. There's something unique about a great series. In other words, it's not the same as other series.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Am I asking this question, Kristin? I can't remember. Am I asking the family question?
Go for it.
It's kind of unusual for one family to produce two very successful novelists like yours did. Now, Lee, you talked a little bit about loving and reading from the age of 3. Were your parents, did they encourage reading and were you writing as kids?
No, I never wrote anything until the very first line of Killing Floor. And our parents were, did they encourage books? That's a big word. They certainly felt that books were respectable, because it's difficult for Americans to get their head around, but the British culture at the time was all about respectability, being not frowned upon by your neighbors. And so there were various badges that you could have that illustrated your respectability, and a shelf of books in the house, absolutely, that was one of them. So we were surrounded by books, not necessarily, I don't think, encouraged to explore books, but books were an okay thing, and libraries were an okay thing. And of course, once we were introduced to the library, then we just ran wild. And it was the librarian that was taking the parental role there, saying, try this, try that. So there was permission to do it, but not really encouragement. And in fact, I think possibly for Andrew more than me, because I had 2 other brothers we were a contemporary family of 3 boys, and then we'd all aged out and gone, and Andrew was essentially an only child. And so he was extremely focused upon and needed to escape even more than we did. But we found that, reading was just the perfect escape.
How about you, Andrew? Did you ever have any aspirations to write?
No, none whatsoever. No, I mean, in the same way that Lee just described, I mean, it is ridiculous for 2 authors to be saying this, but I had no concept of the author of a book. I loved books themselves, and I loved going to a bookstore and wandering around, but back in the days before you had algorithms feeding you suggestions online, back when you'd actually go to the bookstore and wander about it. I'd go at random, pick things that looked interesting, could be absolutely anything, bring them home and read them. I loved doing that. But I never thought about the people that wrote the books. I never went to a book launch. I never went to a book signing or an author talking about their books, anything like that. But looking back, a lot of people, it turns out that as little kids, they dreamed of being novelists, and they would, write books on paper and cut out cereal packets and turn them into the covers and things. Never did that. But what I realized I did really obsess about was just telling stories. Maybe because my life itself was so boring, and I would always want to, make it more exciting by adding, fictitious details to it. And so as a kid and a teenager, I was constantly telling stories. And sometimes it was really useful. You hadn't done your homework, but so, you come up with a sufficiently elaborate story that, even if the teacher doesn't believe it, they give you credit for having been imaginative. So I would tell stories constantly. And then I had thought if I was going to do anything creative, it would have been in the theatre, because I did English literature at university, which I actually actually hated. And so I wound up doing English and drama because that was as much of a change as I could really engineer. And the drama part was fabulous because if you are obsessed with storytelling, what is a more natural way to tell a story than have people stand and act it out and speak the lines? You know, it is perfect. And so, you know, that was my first line. And I did actually, after university, I set up a theatre company with some of my friends, and we ran that for a couple of years, and that was fantastic in every respect, apart from financial. You know, we wound up completely broke, so I had to get a real job to pay the bills, and theatre, being at the theatre all the time wasn't practical, so that's led me to reading a lot more, and reading a lot more kind of leads you to writing in the end because it's a kind of natural extension. It's like reading, only you decide what happens.
Yeah, and from my point of view, I think one of Andrew's great strengths is character. And looking back retrospectively, I remember I was long gone. I was nearly 20. I dropped into the family home, and Andrew would be about 4. And he invented an imaginary friend for himself, also called Andrew, like a lot of kids do, I guess, or some kids do. But this was the most rounded, three-dimensional, fleshed out imaginary friend I had ever heard of. I mean, he was a genuine person. And looking back on it, I should have known then, this kid is going to grow up a writer.
Right. He's not just an accomplished liar. He's a writer.
Exactly. There's a difference.
Hey, have either of you done cameos on Reacher on the show?
I did a cameo in the last episode of the first season, and annoyingly, the second season, I really wanted to do cameos in all of them, but I went up to Canada where they were shooting the second season, and they picked out a thing, and I was all ready to do it. But we were hit by a polar vortex up there, and the temperature was minus 40 degrees. It was paralyzingly cold. It was really too cold to work, but they carried on, but it slowed it down incredibly, so that my week expired before we'd gotten to that scene. So I didn't get one in the second season, nor the third, nor the fourth, but it was probably just as well, because it's kind of weird if the same guy pops up every time. And even season 1 was weird. Because it was staged in a way that was clearly significant. You know, I was a nobody. I was just an extra, but featured in a way that made it somehow obvious that I was being featured. And writers are not necessarily visually recognizable all the time, so nobody really knew who this was. And there was a whole bunch of online commentary. They thought I was Bryan Cranston. They said, "Why is Bryan Cranston in this? Is he going to be in the next season?"
Excellent.
Andrew, have you done a cameo?
I haven't. No, I mean, it would be fun to do one at one point, but no, you're right, Lee. I mean, and I don't know if you ever watched that show Gilmore Girls, because they actually made a point of that. You know, they actually had one guy who they deliberately had. Every time, you know, somebody had to come and fix the heating. It was this guy. If something was getting delivered, it was this guy. It was one actor in all of those roles, and it was actually hilarious because you started to look forward to it. You know, you think, okay.
That's funny.
Okay, Lee and Andrew, if you would stick around, we have more to talk to you about. But first, a few quick reminders for our listeners and viewers out there.
Yep. For all of you watching and listening, we encourage you to rush out and buy your copies of Exit Strategy. The perfect place, as always, is to do that is the Friends and Fiction shop on bookshop.org. You will not only be getting the book at a discount, but all your purchases there support our show, our guests, and independent bookstores nationwide.
And don't forget to visit friendsandfiction.com for details on our show schedule, upcoming in-person events, links to our merch store, our Substack newsletter sign-up, and the award-winning Friends and Fiction official book club with Brenda and Lisa. Mark your calendars for Thursday, December 4th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, when they will be hosting a happy hour with Ron Block and a surprise guest.
And speaking of our Substack, you can read all our free weekly posts on the Substack website or app, or subscribe for free to get them directly in your inbox. And if you upgrade to our paid Substack, which is just $5 a month, you will have access to deeper dives with all of our weekly show guests, like Lee and Andrew, plus occasional roundtable discussions like the recent one Meg did on debut novels and crime fiction. And also in-depth interviews and features like the Q&A I recently did with novelist Jamie Brenner, and the one I recently did with actress and children's book author Aria Mia Loberti. If you enjoy tuning in for our weekly author interviews, this is a big way you can support us for about $1 each week. Check us out at friendsandfiction.substack.com.
Okay, Lee and Andrew, back to you. Where can readers catch up with you on the road? Are you going on the road?
A little bit in the United Kingdom. We're doing 2 events together, aren't we? We've got Manchester on Tuesday the 11th. We have Edinburgh on Monday, whatever the next Monday is, 18th, is it? 17th, 18th. And then I'm also going to be in Winchester and in Leeds at some literary festivals. So I guess the best place to follow us online would be jackreacher.com. But there'll also be Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So details should be out there.
I'm glad Andrew said all of that, because I'm way too old for all this social media stuff. I have no idea where you can follow us online.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure speaking with both of you. Thank you so much for being on the Friends and Fiction Show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. It's been an absolute delight.
Thank you. Okay, now be sure to tune in 2 weeks from tonight when Kristin, Kristy, Patti, and I will all be together live to welcome John Irving to discuss his new novel, Queen Esther. That show will air live, which I already mentioned, on the Friends and Fiction Facebook page and YouTube channel on Wednesday, December 3rd at 7 p.m. Eastern, and it will be published to our podcast for your listening pleasure on Friday, December 5th.
Thank you to all of you out there for being with us. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in. You can join us every week on Facebook or YouTube, where our live show airs on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram. We're so glad you're here.